Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Saskatchewan election update forecast, we could call it. Now, before I begin, I'd like to once again shout out all the channel members. Really appreciate the support you guys give the channel, and if you guys want to support the channel, by all means, go in the link in the description below and join. Otherwise, do your regular YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, and comment below. And one final note I want to have before I begin the video today, I am still doing a poll. That's going to cover New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, BC, and Canada Federal. So make sure it'll be in the pinned comment that you go fill it out if you are interested in participating in the poll. I desperately need more people for Saskatchewan. I'm on the cusp of actually having enough sample to even bother doing it. That doesn't mean it's going to necessarily be a good sample, because the sample's probably going to be relatively small, but if I don't cross this threshold, the sample is not usable. I have currently 49 Saskatchewan respondents so far, and I need 72 for my methodology to even bother. That doesn't mean 72 is going to give me a good poll. It just means 72 is enough for me to bother trying. But with that, let us begin. So, the Saskatchewan election right now is interesting, in that we're in this kind of interesting stasis point. Everyone knows it's about to happen. It hasn't been called, at least as far as I'm aware at the time of recording. And we are slowly inching the way to when this call is going to occur. And because of that, there's not really anything. People are kind of holding their breath. People don't seem to want to be doing too much. Now, I'll just digress momentarily here, because again, since we don't really have any big announcements so far, there's nothing really to say on announcement sides or analyze on that point on who's making good decisions, who's making bad decisions. But what we can do is do something that a bunch of people asked me to do in the last video, which is talk about some of these last two Insightrix polls that I thought were dubious. And again, this is not a slight against Insightrix as a pollster. Lots of their polls prior to the last two I thought were perfectly fine. Or, well, their last poll looked fine. The two before it looked dubious to me. But I'm not going to spend as much time as I did with the New Brunswick one about this, because I feel like in hindsight I went a little too long. The views on that video were fine, but I don't want to spend an entire video talking about why I think a particular poll is dubious. I think in the last Insightrix poll looked probably fine. It's aggressive. It's very different than the Main Street or Angus Reid polls, but that doesn't mean, just because it's a different headline doesn't mean it's a bad poll, or a dubious poll, I should say. So I'll compare this one here, because this is the one back from February. And the reason why I think this is a dubious poll, so right here is what the 2020 results look like. Now, I will concede, Insightrix could be using a different definition of these regions than I am, but I don't really see how any different definition would dramatically change anything here. So, the main gist of why I think this poll seems dubious, it boils down to how the regions are shifting. So the thing that you usually see in a province like Saskatchewan, which is relatively homogenous, or I'm going to just say in a jurisdiction like Saskatchewan, relatively homogenous. Yes, you have the four regions that we have here. Yes, South is not the North, Regina is not Saskatoon, etc. But compared to, say, Canada at large, where Quebec is very clearly different than the rest of Canada, Saskatchewan's relatively homogenous. So since it's relatively homogenous, you should expect the trend to be very similar in every region. Or, equally, you should expect the most friendly regions to swing more to a party that's gaining ground. But what we're seeing in this regionals for this February 2024 poll, the North which was Saskatchewan Party plus 40, is now plus 22, 18-point swing. I'll just mark this down here so we can keep track of this. The South was plus 54, and this, I marked this wrong. Sorry about that. It's now, this is a 32-point swing, sorry. The South was 59 to 37, which is 22-point lead from 54, so it's a 32-point swing. The North is 54 to 38, which is 16-point lead from a 40-point lead, which is a 24-point swing. Saskatoon had a 9-point Sask Party lead, and this poll has a 34-point NDP lead, which is a 43-point swing. And Regina had about a 1-point lead for the Saskatchewan Party, and this poll has a 9-point lead for the NDP, which is a 10-point swing. And this here is why I find this poll dubious. It seems very unlikely to me that you are going to see, when the province at large is having, plus 2, a 34-point swing, no, a 30-point swing, that you are going to see the capital, something like Regina, which usually tends to lean more NDP, barely swing. But then the most friendly region for Saskatchewan Party to swing significantly. That seems very unlikely. And further, you would expect something like the North and the South to have very similar swings, the North possibly swinging more. But we're seeing the opposite. And likewise, this swing in Saskatoon just seems incredible, given the fact that Regina isn't swinging. Now, if the cities swung the same amount and the rurals swung a similar amount, that is more believable. What makes this really tough for me to take at face is that these two the cities are dramatically different and the rurals are dramatically different. An 8-point difference is quite substantial, especially considering you would expect the South to actually be better for the Saskatchewan Party. Or at the very least, we would expect the South to have a very strong, possibly like Saskatchewan United Party presence. But the data here, which is 96% of the vote is going to Saskatchewan Party or NDP, according to Insightrix, which is very possible, by the way. The third parties, I have a lot of third party vote here, apparently 7%. That could just be entirely noise. Third parties usually talk big game and do nothing. Well, yeah, so we don't have a huge third party vote splinter here. So it seems unlikely to me. Does that mean Insightrix is a bet bolster? No. That could very well just be, with an N equals 800, these regions are probably about 100, 120, 200-ish people each, give or take. It could just be a fluky sample. Because, for example, let's pick these two. At 200-person margin of error, 200-person sample, your margin of error is going to be 7%. So this is 7% low, and this is 7% high. Then we have something like this. Yeah, that's still a very big delta, but it's a much smaller delta. And with these two, if let's say this is 3 points low and this is 3 points high, then we have something like this, and that's very possible. This kind of number is plausible. This is more plausible. Still a huge outlier to Saskatoon, but maybe you could start looking at regional factors or differences, because the Saskatoon number is now not that much bigger than the South number. So it's more in play. So you could see something like this where margin of error could be causing an otherwise probably reasonable lead to magnify really significantly. And keep in mind, the 7% margin of error, technically speaking, could lead to a larger swing, but then the actual margin of error, but I'm not going to go into that. That's a little more complicated than needs to be said here. So all this to say, I don't have... I will level criticism when I see criticism is fair. I think this poll is... I'm skeptical of this particular poll, but I don't want people to take, I think, what can be legitimate and good skepticism, because, you know, criticizing people when they make mistakes, honestly, they'll be better next time. But I don't want this to turn into people, what you'll see occasionally, especially in the US, is people just outright denying polls. Or you have a lot of people who are Trudeau sycophants saying that polls are wrong or polls are lying. No. You shouldn't believe that. You shouldn't say that in general terms. Now, particular pollsters are bad. I don't think Insightrix is one of those. And I am not abashed to call out pollsters for being bad, like Ecos. Ecos is a bad pollster. But let us continue with overall Saskatchewan things. So, since we don't have a ton of details, at least I have not seen a ton of details about the specificities of the campaigns, like the main issues. And by that, I mean like the ones that the parties themselves are campaigning on. Because, again, the election hasn't happened yet, hasn't started yet. I don't want to say how that's going to go yet, because I don't know. But what I can say is the general overall goal here. And we'll talk this from the perspective of the NDP, because the Saskatchewan Party is pretty obvious. Their goal is just to survive. They have a 9-point lead. They have a 9-seat lead. They have about an 11-point lead in popular vote. They just need to not lose much ground. As long as they can maintain their position, they will continue. They will win re-election. The NDP, though, if they want to win, they have a much trickier time. Because we break this down here, so we have, say, the north part of Prince Albert, south part of Moose Jaw, these two ridings in Saskatoon. Again, I've not memorized all of these, it's too hard. And then this one in Regina. I've covered too many Canadian elections, and all these riding names are quite... They're better than the US ones, by the way, because the number system the US uses is... Good luck remembering any of that. But... And there's just too many ridings. I'm not going to remember all these. So... Oh, and there's also this riding, too. So, what is that total? That total is 6. There's about 6 ridings I think are reasonably in play for the NDP. And if you really stretch it, if you really max it out, they win every possible riding that they could maybe hope to win. It's 10. So, and that would include Northern Moose Jaw, Southern Prince Albert, this one other part of Regina, and these 2 parts of Saskatoon. Actually, it's 11 seats. Apologies. So they could have 32. 32, to me, seems like the NDP's ceiling based off their vote distribution right now. Now, their campaign could change something. Or the Saskatchewan Party's campaign could change something. But 32 seems to be their pretty much absolute ceiling, and that requires sweeping Saskatoon, sweeping Regina, sweeping Moose Jaw, sweeping Prince Albert, and holding their 2 in the north. That seems very difficult. Especially because these different regions are different. Yes, Regina and Saskatoon are cities. Moose Jaw and Prince Albert aren't cities. Not in any useful sense of the term city. They're both, I think, roughly like 30,000 people, give or take. You could say they're a large town, but I would not call that a city myself. So that makes it very difficult. A large town is going to want different things in a big city. Big city is the wrong word. A city. Neither Saskatoon nor Regina are quote-unquote big. So that's already difficult there. But even between Saskatoon and Regina, they're very different. Regina is more of a government town. Saskatoon's more of like a blue-collar industrial town. very broad general strokes here. So it's definitely possible. The NDP have definitely done this before. They have won elections before. And the elections they've won before have pretty much followed that blueprint. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Especially not, I think, particularly right now, where the NDP has such negative headwinds because of Singh. I genuinely think Carla Beck would be in a much stronger position right now if Jagmeet Singh wasn't the federal leader. Because the federal NDP paints a really bad picture for the provincial NDP. First off, the federal NDP is not very fiscally responsible, which gives a lot of people a bad brand impression of the provincial NDP on their fiscal responsibility. Second, the federal NDP is very hyper-focused on social issues, which obviously is out of sync with a lot of the people in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's quite a socially conservative province, so a very socially liberal federal NDP is discordant with that. Now, the provincial NDP may or may not be as fiscally liberal or socially liberal. I can't necessarily say offhand because we haven't seen their platform yet, we haven't seen their campaign yet. But assuming they're trying to be more socially moderate, they have a big headwind because a much more notable, a much more well-known brand of the party that's in the news more often is just silly. Acts silly, is run by a clown. So that's a very big headwind for Carla Beck. And simultaneously, Scott Moe has a big asset in that he can offload a lot of his issues right now onto Trudeau. Now, in a similar election right now, in BC, EB can't do that. Because to do that, you have to actually oppose Trudeau. And for the longest time, EB's been really hesitant to actively oppose Trudeau. Now he's a little more, these days, playing against carbon tax and a couple other things. But it took him a long time to really start warming up to being anti-Trudeau. But Scott Moe is very anti-Trudeau. And what that means is that any failings you can think of for the Saskatchewan Party's government, a lot of them can be reasonably articulated to be offloaded to the feds. Now, you might think that might be dishonest, or you might think that is not true, and that's fair. You can think that. But a lot of voters will be persuaded by that because it's very plausible. For example, one of the issues Saskatchewan has right now is the economy is not doing so hot. Now, Canada's economy overall is not doing so hot, but Saskatchewan's economy particularly is not doing so hot. And this is leading to things like a big budget deficit and declining resource royalties and stuff like that. And that's bad. That's a bad thing for the Saskatchewan Party. But the Saskatchewan Party and Scott Moe can just say, oh, well, the resource royalties are doing bad, or resource extraction is doing bad, the resource sector is doing bad because of Trudeau and his anti-resource government. And a lot of people will be persuaded by that because it's a very good, very plausible, very straightforward explanation. And it's a complete get-out-of-jail-free card. Is it actually Trudeau's fault? Well, the NDP will tell you no, it's the Saskatchewan Party's fault. And the Saskatchewan Party will say, yeah, it is Trudeau's fault. Who's correct? Well, me, I don't know. I've not looked in the issues enough for Saskatchewan to really tell you which one is right or wrong, but I can tell you that those are the two positions of argument. And that's really what this election's going to be about, in my opinion, is can the NDP successfully convince voters in Saskatchewan that they are not the federal NDP, that they're more fiscally responsible, that they're going to be better at running the economy, that they're more trustworthy, that they're not as socially liberal? And can Scott Moe convince people that the problems Saskatchewan is facing today are because of Trudeau and not because of the provincial government. The answer to those questions is the answer to the election. Do voters buy that it's Trudeau's fault? Do voters buy that this Saskatchewan NDP is not the same party, is not the same creature as the federal NDP? Now, in Western Canada, it's a lot easier for people to take that the NDP is a different party than the federal party, their provincial NDP. Eastern Canada is not true. Which side of that spectrum is the quote-unquote winning side? Is the West becoming Easternized? Is the East becoming Westernized? That's actually a more interesting overall question, because if the Western NDP becomes Easternized, in the sense that people think that they are equivalent to the federal party, the NDP is toast. They're not going to win elections for a long time in Western Canada. But if they can be seen as distinct, more moderate, more fiscally responsible, then you get governments like Wab Kinew in Manitoba. Only time will tell which one will happen for the Saskatchewan election. But with that, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next time with something else.